Welcome back to the channel. I'm Kevin, and today I'm going to be making the Amulet of Vigor from Magic the Gathering. Along the way, I'm also going to be putting my Bamboo P1P FFF printer head-to-head with my Photon Mono 4K Resin printer. Now to be clear, this isn't an official buyer's guide or some sort of product comparison. This is just me, as a hobbyist that happens to own these two printers, trying to figure out how to best use them to make cool things. Now this is actually a project I promised to do months and months ago, and to my credit, I did most of it, but then I got distracted making other stuff. True to my word, I've come back today to finish it off and share the results with all of you. This definitely has nothing to do with issues I'm having with my P1P, and needing to buy some time to figure that out. So the backstory here is that I set up my resin printer about 6 months ago. I'd love to say it was a new purchase, but I actually bought it about 3 years ago, and just never got around to using it. I'm asthmatic and got nervous about having this in my house, so I built an overly elaborate enclosure so I could put this in my garage and safely vent all the fumes. I even added a little heater so I could still use this during the winter. I was actually going to make an entire video about building that enclosure, but it went so poorly, I threw out the idea. Too much time had passed, so I just ended up buying a normal respirator. I'm not sure what I'm going to do with the enclosure in the future, but I can print for now, which is all that really matters. So far, I've used the printer to make a couple of things. The big one being a custom Unicorno figurine, which I gave away as a Christmas gift, but I'm still very much getting the hang of this. The idea of this project was to print the same thing with both my resin and FFF printer, as well as do a hybrid of the two and see what looks better. This was something I already knew I needed to do, just as I started to get a handle on how to best use these two printers, but I'm hoping it will be helpful, or at least amusing for those of you at home. As for why I chose to make the Amulet of Vigor from Magic the Gathering, well, this actually has a lot of significance for me. I actually tried to make this years ago when I first started the channel, but my printer at the time and my design skills really weren't up for the challenge, so I ended up scrapping the project and the footage never saw the light of day. This has always been a bit of the one that got away from me, and it was the original reason I wanted to get a resin printer, so I was excited to come back and do this properly. I started by rotating and scaling the reference in GIMP, then tracing all the details as I thought about the modeling. I do have a drawing tablet, but I was too lazy to turn it on, so you can see me doing this with just my mouse. As for determining the size, I went with the very scientific approach of playing around with stuff on my crafting desk, until I decided that the lid of my brush soap was a good fit. I planned to make the exterior gold ring, not including those protruding cross pieces, about 70mm across, maybe a little bit more. As a sanity check, I measured my own thumb with some calipers, and extrapolated the size of the amulet based off that. This could be as much as 80mm across, but I know I'm in the right ballpark. I started by creating the exterior gold ring, and then moved on to adding the other external details. I didn't expect it, but this internal rim was actually one of the hardest parts to do. It looks deceptively simple, but it took a lot of tweaking. It shouldn't be a surprise that the most time-consuming part was the face, with the eye and other squiggly details. I outlined all of this on a plane, and then extruded the various details upwards. I creased all the edges I needed to stay sharp, and then applied a subdivision surface modifier, which smoothed things over nicely. I divided this up and went to printing, which is when things got interesting. I printed this on my resin printer without really knowing what I was doing, and then put this in the wash and cure station. At this point, I had an unexpected work call come up, and I ended up leaving this in the isopropyl alcohol for a lot longer than I planned. This was clearly ruined, but I wasn't too mad about it. This was maybe my third or fourth resin print ever, and learning stuff like this was exactly why I did the project. I printed this at a better angle, I think, and crucially, I didn't let it dissolve this time. I did a little bit of sanding, but not very much, before spraying these with some Citadel primer and declaring them ready to paint. I also printed a set of these on my Bamboo P1P, using the 0.08mm high quality setting. I do wish I'd printed this as two flat halves, and then glued them together at the end, because printing this vertically did create a bit of unevenness towards the bottom, which really bugged me. This annoyed me enough that I did actually try to reprint this, which is when I realized my printer wasn't going to cooperate and I needed to move ahead with what I already had. I covered my FFF prints in some gray automotive primer, like I usually would. I applied several coats of folk art metallic paint to both. I didn't use any fancy Vallejo paints or wet palettes this time, just cheap brushes and inexpensive paint. For the faces, I used some white and gray matte paint mixed with a bit of silver folk art metallic paint, which didn't really show up. I did try to paint this to look like marble, like we see in the reference image, but I didn't do a very good job. At this point, I'd already made so many mistakes, which I'll talk about in just a second as I'm going through the results, that I decided to not obsess over this detail and just power through. Hello, I'm Kevin from the future. As I was editing this video, I got increasingly annoyed with my past self, deciding that it's fine if this doesn't look good. I had spent so much time and effort on this, and I'd been dreaming about doing it for literally years, that copping out at the last minute just didn't sit well with me. I'm going to show you the rest of this attempt and the original video I filmed, but then at the end, instead of doing the sign-off I had prepared, I'm going to launch into part 2 of the video, where I remake this and do a much better job, so stick around. After the painting, I had to glue the faces into place, which is when I realized that my super glue had leaked, and ended up destroying this blue silicone mat I've been using for years. It's inexpensive to replace, but it's certainly a bummer. To wrap this up, I went to thread some cord through the top of each of these to match what we see in the reference image. I succeeded on the FFF version, but not so much on the resin one. Let's have a conversation about my assumptions going into this, as well as the actual results. My expectation was that the FFF printer was going to do a really good job with the exterior golden piece, but would struggle with the details on the face. I thought the resin printer would do a good job with everything, but I figured it was going to be too much of a hassle to work with the larger pieces in resin, and it just wouldn't be worth it on future projects. The winner, at least in my mind, was going to be a hybrid, where I used my FFF printer for the exterior piece and used the resin printer to print the really high detail face that goes inside. Weirdly, it didn't really work out like that, which was kind of a surprise. Before I give you all the details, I do have to ask, if you made it to this point in the video, I hope you'll like and subscribe. I don't enjoy doing these plugs, it's honestly my least favorite part of all of this, but I do really love sharing these projects with all of you, and I'm trying to grow the channel to the point that I can someday rationalize investing more time and money in making content. I'll move on to the details, but I do hope you'll all help me out with this. On the one I printed with my Bamboo P1P, the gold exterior looks pretty good, especially on the top half. The bottom does have that weird irregular angle from the printing orientation, but that could easily be fixed. The big issue is with the details. I could probably sand most of this area to get it a little bit smoother if I invested more time, but as for these curved details, that would be really hard. The face was also a lot better than I expected. The details were a little bit tight, and I could have done a better job finishing this, but it's clearly recognizable. If I had done a better job with the painting, I would probably have been very happy with this result. The resin version looks pretty good, except for some mistakes that I made. You can see that some of these pieces are broken and bent, which probably wouldn't have happened if I made them an extra 0.5 millimeter thicker. The back, which I didn't end up finishing, also had a lot of remnants from the supports. Those issues are honestly all on me. I learned a lot about how to sand resin prints when I was making the custom Unicorno, but because this project has been delayed for so many months, I actually printed, sanded, and primed this before finishing that unicorner project, so I really didn't know better at this point in time. The face also looks pretty good, although it did cup around the edges, which made it tricky to insert. One of the biggest issues, which once again is all my fault, is that I didn't clear the supports out of the channel on the top, so I couldn't actually thread a cord through here. My takeaway is that the resin version had the potential to be absolutely stunning. Way beyond my wildest expectations when I got into resin printing. I think I just need to keep paying my dues and learning how to better orient models for printing, how to sand them effectively, and how to not dissolve stuff in isopropyl alcohol. I'm really excited to see what I can manage after a few more months of practice. In terms of planning for the future, right now I'm thinking about my projects as existing on a spectrum. Something like a dagger is going to be very clearly on the FFF side, just due to the size. A tabletop miniature, on the other hand, is going to be on the resin side, due to the detail and scale. Most of my projects fall in this middle zone, which is what makes this so interesting. I think the deciding factor is going to come down to color and finish. If I'm doing a metallic paint or a lighter color, or something reflective, it really brings out the flaws in a surface, so having the resin printer, which can do a really smooth finish, is a huge advantage. Anything like jewelry replicas or solo leveling keys is going to get printed on my resin printer. Some of the other stuff, which is in darker colors, like Leia's statue from Stardew Valley, is probably going to be done on my FFF printer, because it uses a darker wood tone which will hide a lot of minor issues. And this is where I originally ended the video. My conclusion was that you could print this on either printer, but the resin printer was going to give you better results. I haven't had months of extra practice, but as I was reviewing the footage, I realized there were already a few things I could improve on, so here we go. I did go back and make these cross pieces an extra 0.5 millimeter thicker, then reprinted this and found it held up so much better. It was an educated guess which happened to be spot on, which felt really good. I was more careful removing the supports here. Last time, I snapped them all off like I would on a typical FFF print, where it's easy to fill nicks with wood filler, but on resin prints, you want to leave a little bit of a protrusion that you can sand down. I went at this with some sanding sticks. I'll have affiliate links to these and all the other materials I used in the video description down below, so if you're planning to order any supplies, that's a great way to support the channel on Amazon's dime. Last time, I primed these while they were lying flat, which took multiple coats of primer and didn't do a great job. This time, I attached the exterior gold piece to an old paper towel tube using some painter's tape so it could spin it around while spraying. This got much better coverage in just a single coat and saved me a lot of primer. The biggest improvement was with the paint job. I watched a tutorial on how to paint marble pattern, and I'm going to roughly go through the steps here, but if you want to see the actual tutorial, which I highly recommend, I'll put a link in the video description down below. I started by painting the faces a grayish color. Then I painted some white lines for the veins running through the marble. Next, I did my best to feather these out slightly before applying a darker wash to mellow everything out. I was freaking out at this step because it was already looking way better than I expected. Lastly, I went back through and added some crisp white lines to define these veins. In between those steps, I was also painting the exterior gold piece, but somehow managed to film none of it. What I did was start with some Vallejo gold paint, but it had such poor coverage that I gave up and ended up using the folk art metallic paint I used on the last version. I ran into some trouble when trying to pop the faces into place. They were a little bit too big, so I actually had to use a crafting knife to shave down the sides of one of them. If you're making your own, I'd recommend test fitting all of this and sanding these if needed. I did get the faces in, but they took some of the gold paint with them, so I had to do a few touch-ups. I sprayed this all with some clear matte sealer. I didn't do this on my last attempt, but this looks so good it deserves the full treatment. Lastly, I added some cord. I couldn't thread this through because I never figured out how to get the supports out of this area, so I poured in some super glue and wedged the ends in there. I definitely used too much glue though because it soaked into the first half inch of the cord and made it super stiff. I absolutely love how this turned out. It's not my biggest or flashiest project, but it is one of the most detailed. I'm really glad I did part 2 of this video. The result is great, and it's really satisfying because it feels like I'm expanding my capabilities as I get the hang of resin printing. If you want to make your own, I'll post all the files online. Check the video description down below for a link, and I'll see you all again next month with another project.